How long will this go on for? Nobody really knows. And will Roaring Kitty ever actually reveal himself? I also think it's not him. I'm going to go out and say it. I'm not entirely sure what the hell's happening. But Keith, if you're out there, I'd love to have you on Coinage because I would love to know what the hell's happening. Welcome in, everybody, into another crypto news recap here on Coinage. I'm the host of Coinage, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studio, back from Austin, Texas, out at Consensus. What a week that it was. Pretty wild out there. Well-attended conference, I think. You also had Karate Combat hosting their bout. A lot going on and a lot of high-power people coming together to talk crypto. We'll have some of the recaps, but most of the news making waves this week didn't really come from Austin so much as they did from D.C., which you're going to get into the latest there as President Biden. Perhaps Texas, you kind of called it. You kind of said Biden was going to veto this thing, our producer over here, saying that Biden was going to veto SOB 121 over, very quiet Friday news. That's basically what we got. So we got that to recap, as well as 25 million coming from Coinbase into a super PAC that will have crypto front and center in this election cycle. But want to start with the action we're seeing on the charts as we take a look at Bitcoin flirting with 70K. A lot to get into there. Of course, still potentially watching a shift more in the ETH direction as we see ETH ETFs come as soon as perhaps this week. We'll see how quickly the S1s get reviewed by the SEC, and we'll see what happens there in terms of the trading and when it shall begin. But I want to start with, as mentioned, the Biden veto on this front to kick off, because it's a little bit of a back and forth. This was also discussed at Consensus with a debate, including Ryan Selkis from Masari, talking about whether it's going to be better to really focus on Donald Trump and riding that wave as the pro-crypto candidate, or trying to attempt something in a bit more bipartisan direction. And a lot of people had been saying that it was Trump that was kind of, leading the charge and applying pressure to Democrats. But then you had Biden quietly coming out and vetoing this rule over SOB 121. Taking a look at it here, Texas, and looking at the headline. It happened, as I said, quietly on Friday. As we look back to what was going to happen on, the president's desk after this was approved both in the House and the Senate. And the answer was basically coming out and saying that he was going to veto this because you need appropriate guardrails to protect consumers and investors. And we'll see what happens now. As people pointed out, it's going to take a supermajority in the House and Senate to overturn this veto. And I think just given kind of how, the vote already surprised people in terms of how many Democrats broke from the ranks, I think it'd be too far of a stretch to think that you're going to get much more votes in the Senate to overturn this. That vote was 60 to 38, so they'd still need quite a few more Democrats to break ranks to overturn President Biden's veto, and that's a very different thing to do than just voting to approve a bill. And as emboldened as Democrats may have felt, because banks, as we covered, banks are not happy with this. And even before President Biden came out to veto this, that was another important highlight, is that a pro-banking association came out and actually told President Biden that it might not be a good idea to veto this. And even that didn't do anything. But I think that that's probably more where Senator Schumer was coming from on this. But important to show that maybe it's not all just Republicans versus Democrats. Also potentially just the banking sector also saying that they want in on the action. But that was the update there with President Biden following through with his veto threat. We didn't know when it was going to happen. He had a little bit more time because it took a while for the bill to actually reach his desk. And so he had until June 3rd, today, pretty sure, and did it on a quiet Friday. So that's something to show you that maybe he's like, okay, this isn't great. There were also reports of him reaching out, his administration reaching out to pro-crypto people as well. So perhaps not fully shifted in position policy yet, but maybe perhaps a softening. A lot to watch there on that front, no doubt, as we dig into what happens next. I do want to say, though, as we shift into this next topic here, Texas, that I'm pretty sure that does maybe put to bed this idea of why the ETH ETFs were approved, because everyone was speculating that, maybe the ETH ETFs got approved because of what happened in Congress, and President Biden's actually on his heels in having to face this veto decision, doesn't want to see another loss at the SEC. I think as we look at what happened with the SEC and approving ETH ETFs, it's become pretty clear that that was just a result of them not wanting to get sued again and lose again, as we saw with the Bitcoin ETF decision after Grayscale took the SEC to court and the SEC lost. If you go back and listen to our interview with Commissioner Hester Peirce back in January, it does sound like what she had said was true, that they learned their lesson and didn't want to go down that path. And a lot of this may not have had anything to do with what was going on in Congress and President Biden looking to veto. And now the question becomes, all right, when are these bad boys going to trade? So I want to get into some of that, because the next question is, what is this going to do to ETH's price? When will they trade? And what exactly happens in terms of inflows? The number to watch, what's it going to be? And looking at that, very interesting reports, two reports to look at. One, I think, Texas, is this block report. A lot of block news going on today, so shout out to their team and what they've been writing up. You got Bernstein analysts doubting that what we just talked about, that this probably wasn't because of what happened in D.C. and the veto, because of exactly what I said, has a lot more to do with just the SEC realizing it may have been better to avoid a legal battle. So no surprise there. But on the other side, question over here is what's going to happen now that we see these come to market. And implied volatility is pretty down. Looks like things are just going to be trading sideways if you look at most of the data, which Luke Stryers, shout out Deribit, met him in Dubai, looking at it, looking like the implied volatility rank is 40, implied volatility percentile is 52, both mid-level indicators is what he's saying there. So not a lot to expect when it comes to volatility for either one of these. Question, though, is how much of this is going to be inflows relative to Bitcoin? What are we going to expect? What's the number to watch? How real is it that they might come anywhere near the Bitcoin ETF inflows, which by all accounts, if you ask the Bloomberg boys, myself, or anybody, pretty wild, Texas, the amount of money, billions of dollars flowing into those since they got off. The problem is there's a huge bit of overhang when it comes to what happens with Ethereum now. And that's kind of the problem, is how many of these funds have cash to allocate to an Ethereum ETF, and what's the upside in doing so if you already have exposure to Bitcoin? Perhaps, sure, you got more volatility and upside, but now that the pendulum has swung so much in the other direction where almost no one expected ETH ETFs to get approved, cash out of the bag, now it's a question when they start trading. But how much capital is really left? And it sounds like if you ask around, the majority of people are kind of in the 10 to 20% camp of where exactly the inflows will go relative to what happened with Bitcoin ETFs. Perhaps not surprising, given the fact that, again, there's that overhang, and everyone who had already wanted to throw money into crypto, if you're out of fund, had the chance to do so via Bitcoin ETFs. And now, ETH ETFs, what's the difference? And that's the problem, is that there's a lot of overhang, a lot of hangover. It's almost as if you just worked out. You did one workout, and now you're like, okay, I got to do another one. But how much energy you got left in the tank? You know, it's the second one that always hurts the most. So not a lot of expectations when it comes to how much is going to flow in here. Of course, I may eat those words. I don't think I will, but that's something to watch as we continue to see when might these things trade. Keep your eyes peeled, and we'll, of course, cover it this week for when we get into when those will actually go live. You had Van Eck coming out and saying that they would be first in line. They had been pushing for that for quite a bit. Of course, they were the first one up there to get approved. And then we got the SEC ruling that it was basically going to be all of them approved. And so we'll see which one officially gets out first, or if they're all going to get greenlit at the same time in a similar move to kind of what we saw with the Bitcoin ETF. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Meanwhile, outside of ETH and Bitcoin, which honestly kind of seem boring relative to the moves that we're seeing even in traditional markets, I'm going to bring up GameStop and check in on that chart, Texas, because Roaring Kitty's back. Roaring Kitty's back in more ways than one. The chart, obviously, this seems to be the trend. Normally, when you open for trading and you see this happen, you get a huge pop because yesterday, Roaring Kitty, or at least the person who has those accounts now, was posting about his open position on GameStop, revealed a $150 million position in GameStop that got a lot of people excited. And I think the question now is this really Roaring Kitty? He hasn't made any public appearances. We haven't seen him on TV. We haven't seen clips of his face. And even if we did, by the way, deepfakes everywhere. Perhaps it's still not Roaring Kitty. But the big news this time, and we were seeing this in Robinhood's trading over the weekend before markets actually opened. But huge position. You're getting conflicting numbers, by the way, because it's not just stock here. We're talking options. $116 million is the number that people are looking at. according to what he has now posted on Reddit, which is pretty important because it's the first time that we've seen him post, if this is again Roaring Kitty, Keith Gill, posting on Reddit, because that's what triggered everything. It was a huge pop higher in GameStop stock because he had disclosed for the first time this position after he had tweeted a bunch of random GIFs and video clips not too long ago. But now you got GameStop popping, and more important perhaps to show here, Texas, which always confuses me a little bit because it's not tied to GameStop stock officially, is GameStop GME token. Which the chart is always hilarious because, again, if you're not tied to anything, what are you really trading on? Turns out you're trading on Keith Gill and whenever he wants to post on social media. And so right after you had him posting on Reddit this time around, what you got was 155% pop. And I don't know what you make of that. I don't know what you want to say to that. But to me, I don't know why you'd be even trading GameStop stock at this point, because it's obviously detached from fundamentals. So why do that when you've got, I don't know, what GameStop was up. What did we just show, Texas? We showed 27% in a day versus 155% in a day. I mean, the upside downside, clearly a higher vol play here. So I don't know why listen, it's like taking, I don't want to make a drug reference for the Ninos out there, but would you want to take crack cocaine, or are you fine with just cocaine? And that's really the real question here. And I don't know what that means. I don't know which one's better, but definitely one of them's stronger, and you got it from a guy that you're not so sure about. And that's GameStop token. And people are playing that, and I guess we're still in this phase. I guess we're still here in meme coin season, definitely strong and still the thing to keep our eyes on. Because certainly that's a little bit more extreme moves than what we're seeing in Bitcoin and Ether. Of course, to the adults in the room, maybe it's not what you're watching, but I have to mention it. I'm legally required to mention it. So that's what's going on the GameStop side. And I think, again, how long will this go on for? Nobody really knows. And will Roaring Kitty ever actually reveal himself? I also think it's not him. I'm going to go out and say it. I'm not entirely sure what the hell's happening. But Keith, if you're out there, I'd love to have you on Coinage because I would love to know what the hell's happening. But always exciting and always proof to show that it's not just kind of fundamentals to worry about in Web3 anymore. It's also everything else that matters. Perhaps why we're seeing so many KOLs included in rounds as well. Speaking of KOLs, perhaps there's no bigger KOL than the man himself, CZ. I don't know if many people would assign that label to him, but still the man to watch as far as I'm concerned. And quietly as well. I don't think this is something that too many people within the industry probably would have covered. Because again, I think we all want to move on from the idea of big names in crypto going to prison or having to battle to stay out of prison. But CZ begins his prison sentence in California. This is the report from Mackenzie Sigalis, who's just hanging out with her at Consensus. So she must have written this one up on the road. Well done. She can do two things at once. Very impressive. I didn't write anything while I was on the road, I don't think. But he's out in Lompoc, which again, no offense to anyone from Lompoc. My cousin's from out there. I think that's where I would build a prison as well. Just a low security prison. That's where he's at. And he's going to be there for 4 months. Officially began. The other little tidbit here for CZ, interestingly, that this prison, I believe, if I read this report correctly, actually requires work. So he's going to be working at this prison. It's not just going to be what we saw from some other crypto criminals at low security facilities, just kind of reading books and working out. He's going to have to be working over there. Which I'm always kind of curious what CZ might do in prison for 4 months, what kind of work he's going to be doing. Of course, when he gets out, he's shifted completely. He really wants to work on education, or at least that's what he's been telling people and really been leaning into, is working on tech education. But interesting to see, again, this doesn't get a lot of coverage, and I don't think a lot of people in crypto really want to talk about CZ going to jail. But nonetheless, officially beginning his sentence, the clock starts now, 4 months until we see CZ get out. These things kind of go quickly, so I don't really think that this is going to get too much coverage outside of it. And honestly, more people are probably paying attention to what's happening to Binance in Africa as their executives continue to battle to get out of the own situations that they find themselves in too. But anyways, nonetheless, that's the update we're seeing from CZ. So important to give that one just because I didn't see a lot of coverage around it. So we'll keep an eye on whether or not he actually goes the full 4 months. And outside of that, speaking of, I guess, crypto's image, moving on from bad things in the past, money's pouring in as we see crypto's war chest continue to increase. Big news around the block this time around is that we have Coinbase throwing their money into the mix as well. And they're joining the likes of Andreessen, MoonPay. MoonPay's money actually went into Stand With Crypto. But now you've got Coinbase throwing $25 million into one of the largest PACs. You might not think, by the way, that crypto would be behind one of the largest super PACs in American politics for this election cycle. But now, when you stack up all the money that's poured in to Fair Shake, the super PAC that is going to be defending, not just in the presidential election, by the way. A lot of people focus on the presidential election, but really Fair Shake is a super PAC that now has, I believe, according to this reporting from Ellie Tarrant, also saw her out at Consensus, $160 million now after the Coinbase $25 million contribution. So Texas, that puts it in the top 5 largest super PACs this election cycle. So you might say, wow, what are the key issues that are going to be dictating how much politicians get this election cycle? I'm sure if you went around and asked people on the street, crypto would not be top of mind. You could go around and probably ask a bunch of people and say, hey, who do you think's controlling the election, or what kind of policies are top of issue? It might be immigration, might be abortion, might be all kinds of things. Might be big oil and gas. People still talk about that quite a bit. Or green energy. I get harassed on the street about green energy. They probably wouldn't say crypto, but now top 5 largest super PACs. And honestly, I kind of have a feeling that the money is still going to be coming in. So there's a good chance by the time we actually hit later in the year, it might be top 3. I don't know how much farther we have to go, but I'm saying that clearly it has become like a make it or break it year. And I think so much of why the attention is on which one's better is it's to lean into really kind of like trying to figure out what's going on with Republicans or pressuring Democrats to swing and leave the anti-crypto days of Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler in the past. You got both camps right now. And, you know, Fair Shake, to their credit, don't really look at things that way. They look at, all right, what are the most influential elections we can target and influence to bring pro-crypto candidates into positions of power, not necessarily, hey, how do we help Republicans win? And so I think, you know, anytime you see a war chest that large get stacked up, it's both A, important to watch what they do with the money, which we'll be doing, but also B, important to watch what races are being swung and how so. So we'll be watching both of those things, but I think important to highlight here just how huge the efforts to influence these elections on the side of huge crypto companies, including Coinbase. They also have Stand With Crypto, which is an entirely separate kind of effort that I mentioned that MoonPay also threw $1 million into. So not just Fair Shake to watch, but also all the other advocacy efforts in DC as well. How much all this is going to change things, I'm not entirely sure. But there are only a few key elections to watch. We covered that a little bit with Perry Ann Boring not too long ago. So we'll continue to track all those things in the months leading up to the election. Because again, it's not just Trump v. Biden. People think it's that all the time. But it's really, I think, a lot of the House and Senate races that could be key here. And that's why anytime you have maybe perhaps someone who is more in the pro-Elizabeth Warren camp start to defect and move a little bit more closer to the pro-crypto camp, as we saw with the Sob 121 vote and Fit 21, which still hasn't necessarily planned to be taken up by the Senate. All those things will be important to watch, and we will always be covering those here at Coinage. But for now, that's pretty much all the news I think worth recapping on the Monday show. As always, we're going to have more news and headlines coming to our site at coinage.media. Encourage you all to check those out as we continue through the week, including an interview with a man behind Athena Labs. Guy came on the show, shout out to him, talked to us a little bit about what makes Athena and their synthetic dollar different than stablecoins in the past. They just crossed $3 billion, the quickest to do so. We're going to drop that interview later on in the week, so keep your eyes peeled for that one. And why it's not Terra 2.0. That's going to do it for us on this edition of a Coinage News Recap. I'm Zach Guzman for everybody here at Coinage, saying goodbye and have a great week. We'll see you again soon.